The conversation we had for this episode lasted an hour and 20 minutes, which is way longer than we feel comfortable sharing for one episode. So we decided to split it in half. This is part one. Also, a disclaimer, we've been trying our best to improve the quality of these audios. In the process, we've ended up using a platform that makes our S's sound interesting and the quality isn't the best. However, the conversation can still be understood. And so we ask you to bear with us about the quality and listen to the content. That's it. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the dungeon. Dum dum dum. What is up?
You look so jolly. You look really happy.
I'm exhausted.
I love your colors today.
Thank you.
For those who are not seeing, Sheedia has a really colorful head wrap. Well, it's bright orange and yellow with some black details. And it looks it's cute.
I'm going to take a screenshot and share it on my Insta today. This episode is published because we're not doing video.
Perfect.
We're not doing video for this episode. Yeah, so how was the last episodes for you? Like, what comments did you get?
So I actually got a comment recently on episode 2, which was the episode where we spoke about the curse of Christianity. And I mean, I'm sure that would be one to stir the pot a little bit. I got 2 comments from 2 friends, at different stages in my life. So a friend who knew me back when I was in that Christian space, and a friend who knew me when I was free out in the world. And a friend who knew me when I was free out in the world was like, dang, like that was some powerful shit. Like, what was that about? You just like, I can't believe you did that. It's so amazing and raving.
Yeah.
But a friend who knew me back when I was in the Christian space and actually is affiliated with the cult like church that I reference, playfully came to me and was like, oh, Charisse, you're just choosing violence. But there was something in it and in the comment that they made that made me think, if I wasn't a stronger person, and at different points in times when I've spoken out about things that have been harmful to me, when I wasn't a stronger person, I would have almost been shamed into silence. And I guess I just wanted to comment that as much as we do have different views on things, and everybody in the dungeon, you as a listener right now, including my friend who will be able to identify himself, thanks for listening, you are a part of the community for sure, and your comments are welcome. But it did get me thinking on a wider scale, some of the reasons why people don't speak about the things that have happened to them that are painful. And I think of this quote in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype. And it's a book that I've been slowly going through that's really been activating a lot of what I would call, well, the wild woman inside of me. She calls it the quien la sabe, the person who knows. It's like the wiser, essential part of ourselves as women that is more connected to the natural essence of who we are. That part of us that has been untouched by patriarchal systems. For those of you who are allergic to words like patriarchy because you think it's just like a politically correct term, okay. Those of us who have been affected by people, by a system that has made it difficult for women to truly understand exactly how powerful they are, right? So that's what I mean when I talk about a patriarchy. It's a book that's helping me to awaken that part of myself that remembers my power, and my power as ultimately a part of nature and a force of nature.
Yeah.
And in the book, she says, a woman who carries a secret is an exhausted woman.
Hmm.
And I resonate with that so much because for the longest time, dealing with the shame of my family abandoning me because of my sexuality, um, dealing with the pain and shame of the ways that Christianity has taught me to disembody myself from my own body and to almost just feel like there's something wrong with sensuality and sexuality. That has exhausted me.
Hmm.
And it's also exhausted me in the sense where I also felt like, man, there's nobody I can talk to about this. And part of the reason, Shady, I agreed to do this podcast with you, and I told you this, was I want to feel more comfortable talking about these things because, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes says, a woman who carries a secret is an
Hmm.
exhausted woman.
Yeah.
There's something else she said in the book that I'd love to read just a little bit of. It's not too
Go
much.
ahead.
Um, it says the keeping of secrets cuts a woman off from those who would give her love, succor, and protection. It causes her to carry the burden of grief and fear all by herself, and sometimes for an entire group, whether family or culture. Further, as Jung said, keeping secrets cuts us off from the unconscious.
Mm.
Where there is a shaming secret, there is always a dead zone in a woman's psyche, a place that does not feel or respond properly to her own continuing emotional life or to the emotional life events of others. And so secrets also cut us off from ourselves because we have to numb this part of ourselves. Oh, don't talk about the church, don't talk about the religion, don't talk about this stuff when you have been harmed.
Hmm.
So you are literally numbing a part of yourself that has been harmed. And just like if you put the anesthesia in your ankle, and she mentioned this in the book, the effect of the anesthesia isn't just limited to your ankle, above and below also gets numb.
Dang.
This happens to the rest of our life as well.
Yes.
And so that's why it's important to be able to speak out. So, no, to my friend, I'm not choosing violence. In fact, I'm choosing peace. I'm choosing peace for
Mm.
myself to be able to release the things that are shameful and heavy inside of me, hopefully to inspire other people to release for themselves too. They don't have to say it on a podcast, but they can say it to the mirror, they can say it to a trusted counselor or a friend, but to allow ourselves to unnumb the hurt parts of ourselves
Mm-hmm.
so that we can also unnumb the joyful parts of ourselves.
Woo. You came in hot. That was There's so much to unpack from that. Because for me, I always talk about, the only way out is through, right? And when we
Mm-hmm.
build walls, we don't only keep the bad out, we also keep the good out, right? Like if you
Mm-hmm.
have a beautiful house with a beautiful scenery and you're afraid that somebody's going to come into your house and you build a tall wall to protect you from those people coming in, it also means that you do not get to enjoy the full scenery anymore because the
Mm-hmm.
wall is there. So
Yep.
you're right. But it also gives me clarity on why I knew that this podcast was so important. It shows me
Mm.
how I liberated myself through this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about YWAM in season 1, talking about the hold of religion in season 1 and with you in season 2, talking about, you know, the things that don't get to express within me. And
Mm-hmm.
some of it were almost like secrets for a long time that I wanted to protect and didn't want anybody to know how I felt. But most of it was just didn't have the space to talk about it. It's been very liberating for me. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. But also, like, welcome to your experience of liberation on, on another level.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that thing you say of space is really critical. And so I guess my encouragement is to friends, and this can probably help you to determine if you're operating as a friend or not, is what space can you hold? And I'm saying this to myself too. I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. I often don't know if I can hold much space for my friends' secret shames.
Hmm.
But what space can we hold for each other's secret shames? Just a question, so that when someone does have the courage to speak up, whether it's elegant or beautiful or pristine, or whether it's messy and gross and snotty nose, like, is there a space where it can actually be held as a friend, as a community member,
Hmm.
as someone who wants to create space for all of us to feel good in ourselves at the end of the day?
Well, I can tell you this: the more I hold space for myself first, then the more I share those quote unquote secrets, is the more that others come to me with those things too. But it's also the more I can hold those things for them and have and give them that space. So
Absolutely.
it's a I go first experience, which is also something we talked about in the last episode, episode 3, which is 15 in the overall thing. Um, where we talked about, you can have these big concepts of, politics need to do this, and these leaders need to change, but you get to change for yourself first. And that, there's so many directions you can go after that, but you cannot change without the actions that you take changing, which then reflects to the actions of other people as well, which can influence so much. But you're going to speak different, you're going to walk different, you're going to show up different, your energy
Mm-hmm.
is going to be different once you choose to look and deal with yourself first.
Mm-hmm. You know, as you say that, I'm in agreement with you. And as you say that, I think of the phrase, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you,
Mm-hmm.
which is popularized also in the Christian faith. And I've actually found in my experience, it's more like do unto myself what I would have others do unto me, which
Mm.
then it makes me more capable to do it unto others, right? Because I'm practicing with myself. And I'm not, so let's give an example. Hard, heavy emotions, the more I'm able to actually allow myself to feel my hard, heavy emotions, is the more I can allow it with someone else. Otherwise, the person threatens my idea of like what's right and good and perfect. If I'm not able to be messy and sometimes sad and sometimes angry with myself and from a place of compassion, it's going to be harder for me to do that to
Mm-hmm.
others. And it's making me think as well, having compassion for people who can't hold space for me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel hurt by people who can't hold space for me, and I think sometimes we do. But then, if we're thinking about this idea that you do unto yourself first, sometimes it doesn't have to be taken so personally. It can be, oh, this person hasn't practiced even holding space for themselves in this way.
Yeah.
So, how could they hold that space for me?
Yeah.
Maybe painful, but it doesn't have to be personal.
No.
But you know, speaking of holding space for things that we have challenges around, I was thinking the other day about race.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I've had a couple of personal relationships recently that have highlighted some race imbalances in a way that I usually don't like to think about.
Yeah.
To be honest, I'll be very honest. I really don't like to think about race per se. And you and I have had conversation on the phone. You are a lot more racially activated, I would say, in a political or community sense than I am. And we spoke about the difference between you in Curacao being interested in that and me in Jamaica and my interest. And I was curious about what spaces you feel you have in Curacao to process issues of race. And then also, if you can just clarify how you identify racially.
Let me start with how I identify. I identify as Black. And if you look at me, some people will call me red, some people will call me mixed, some people say, oh, you're just Latina. I've heard so many different things. Oh, I had this
Mm-hmm.
picture that I took for when I was in becoming a missionary in Trinidad, and that picture I could kind of pass as an Indian, and they thought I was Indian
Mm-hmm.
because obviously in Trinidad there's a lot of Indian. But here in Curacao, nobody would probably think that. But there, because of that influence, I think they saw it and they're like, "You look Indian," which I really do not see that. But I could see that in this one picture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the reason I identify as black is because I am mixed, but I am not mixed in the sense of I have a white parent and a black parent. I am mixed generations ago. Like my, I think it was, what is it? Five, 5 to 6 generations ago was when I started mixing on one side of my lineage, just one side, right? So the mixture didn't happen yesterday. It for sure didn't happen in the last 3 generations, I think. I might be mixing the amount of generations, but for sure the last 2 generations. My parents are not mixed like black and white. Neither are my grandparents, and I don't think my great grandparents are either. So that's interesting. Now,
So they're all what you would call red, or what some people would call red. Is
um
that what you're saying?
I just
More or less?
yeah, I have family members that could pass as white, like white,
Okay.
green eyes.
Okay.
So, but they also have ancestors, like those same people that could pass as white have enslaved African blood within their system that I can trace back and tell you the
Mm-hmm.
exact name of that person.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mixed all around. Now, for me, when I look at how much do I have within me, do I have more white within me or do I have more black within me in regards to experiences? And I see that my mindset, my way of interacting, what I'm more drawn to, what the way that I see myself, all of it leans more towards the black experience. And so that is the reason why I chose to identify as black.
Okay.
Um, in regards,
And I also wanted to know what kind of spaces you feel you have in Curacao to explore
mm,
the issues of race.
I think there's plenty of spaces now, but I've only discovered these spaces in the past year, and I think part of that is because I've been actively looking, and another part of that is because there has been put a magnifying glass on these issues and how it relates to us in the current reality, because in December of 2023, 2022, the Dutch government asked for forgiveness in regards to slavery. And on July 1st, 2023, the Dutch king asked for forgiveness in regards to slavery. So it's been a year and a half, you can say, since the Dutch government asked for forgiveness, of this thing becoming more of a topic. And so I've been finding those spaces more and more and more and more, but also I'm actively looking for it.
And what motivates you to look for these spaces on a personal level?
For me, I think it all really started clicking on the importance of this with the death of George Floyd. Like just seeing how that man
Mm,
was slowly killed, with everybody telling the murderer that you're killing the man and the person just ignoring it. it sent me down a rabbit hole of how could this happen, you know? Um, and I started to look more at the nuances of race because I used to say before the George Floyd event, I used to publicly chest up say I was never racially discriminated against. And then I started looking at the nuances and I started understanding that things that I thought were just, oh, it was just a comment they made, was really a racial comment. And if I look at the impact of that comment on me, it changed my whole trajectory. And I can give a very clear example of this. So that came after the George Floyd thing, like one of the first things that clicked for me. I spent 6 months in Lakeside, Montana, in the US. Just to give you an example, when I was in Atlanta at the airport trying to get my student visa in my passport, or not trying, getting my student visa in the passport, the immigration officer looked at me, pulled up a white paper, and said, after spending that much time in Montana, you're going to be as white as this paper. Now, I'm not going to go into
Hmm.
the details of what that implies or whatnot, but that just tells you how white that place is, how much lack of sun there is. Like, literally, I was the
Hmm.
whitest I've ever been in my life. And what that experience was like, you know, and I was on a missionary base with people from all around the world. And there were people from different racial backgrounds, not going to deny that, but the white class was still like a dominant thing, and white culture was
Hmm.
obviously prevalent because we were in white America, like that type of thing. And something that was often commented to me was that I needed to do more. Now, I went there to study dance class. So, what I was doing in class was always like, you needed to do more. And that never felt right with me because something that I experienced a lot when I was there was headaches. Now, remember, I'd never seen snow my entire life. It was cold as fuck. The culture was weird. Everything was just, I was in another world, another dynamic mansion, and I couldn't
Yeah.
really fathom all the things. Now, I got a lot
Yeah.
of headaches, and I did all my best to try to not have them, like sleeping at 9 o'clock, which is so not me. Um, but that impacted my performance in class. Also, they, even though I auditioned for that school, they basically accepted everybody. There was a heavy focus on ballet in that school. And there was this Rwandan guy who had never seen ballet in his entire life. Like, not even done it, haven't never even seen it, and had no idea what it was. So, just so you can get an example that everybody was just accepted in that school. And so, the fact that there was such a heavy thing on me that, oh, you're not doing enough, that hurt me really deeply. And I thought there was something wrong with me. But if I really looked at it, it's two ways. It's the stereotypical, oh, the lazy black woman is in this school, right? And when I started to see that, I was like, oh, but also I've been also ingrained that I need to do above and beyond everything in order to succeed. And in this instance, I really could not. My above and beyond wasn't above and beyond compared to everyone else, which is what I was used to. It was a lot. But it was, if I look at it differently, if I look at the racial component in that instance, I'm like, oh, no, I couldn't have done more. And just
Yeah.
because you couldn't see me doesn't mean that I didn't give my all, like literally my all.
It's interesting you talk about whether or not they can see you because as you're talking, it's reminding me of my awakening to racism when I was in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago. So I'll give a little bit of my racial history um, before I go into this story. I'm Jamaican. I look like I look like the color of burnt caramel. Let's call it that, right? Or I think maybe darker. No, dark. I look like milk chocolate. I look like a milk chocolate bar,
Mm-hmm.
if we want to try to put a color to it. So I'm a little bit darker. My family, my father is about your shade, Sheedia.
Mm-hmm.
So more of what we call browning in Jamaica, my dad. And my mother is closer to a dark chocolate. She's not there at the dark chocolate, but she's like between me, milk chocolate, and dark chocolate. And in our family, four of us kids, two of us are my complexion and two of us are my dad's
Hmm.
complexion. And growing up, I always understood that my lighter skinned sister was just the prettier one. Like I just knew that. And it was
Mm.
like I almost didn't have a problem with it. I didn't question it. I just knew she was the pretty one. Everybody would call her Dolly because also based on our heritage, there's obviously whites in our heritage as
Mm-hmm.
well. Um my my two lighter skinned siblings, when they were born, they were both actually born with gray eyes that slowly turned to green and then to brown.
Hmm.
So that was some of like the racial, not the racial heritage was making itself evident through them. Um, and so I just always understood that my sister was the prettier one. And I mean, even in Jamaica, Buju Banton have him song about, you know, no, if say, I love my Browning. How the Browning song go? I don't know. Actually, I don't even remember the Browning song because I just remember that he had to make a black woman song
Mm.
to make up for it. I'm saying, me no stop cry for a black woman. Only for things are going for your complexion, but you no stop cry for a black woman. Hey. But yes, because, so he had originally made a song about browning and how him loved the brown skin girl. And eventually had to make one for darker skin women as well. But it's known in Jamaica that lighter skin is associated with more
Mm-hmm.
beauty. Though it's been shifting. So as I grew up, I always had access to racially aware spaces, meaning the majority of Jamaicans are of African descent and visibly
Mm-hmm.
so. So I know that's a difference with you and
Mm-hmm.
Curacao. So our history was never a secret or something we weren't quite aware of. We were grown up with a big awareness of our African heritage in our dances, in school projects, in end of year shows, over and over African pride, proud to be a black person. Even though colorism is still alive and well in Jamaica, there was still space being carved out for black power and black pride.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting is because of that space, I didn't necessarily have time to feel ugly because I'm dark skinned. No, I would say I'm medium skin. I imagine that if I was darker skin, it would have been harder because I know they've been darker skinned people in my class than me who have been teased horrifically and looked down on. But generally speaking, I never necessarily felt any sort of discrimination about the color of my skin. Also, because I grew up upper middle class, so my
Mm.
family was comfortable. We were within a comfort range where it wasn't that my skin had kept us back, right? Or skin color had kept us
Yeah.
back. So it was easier for me to feel comfortable in my skin. But what's interesting is that you mentioned the George Floyd thing because I was actually living in Chicago when that
Oh wow.
happened, and so I was I'm actually getting emotional as I remember the time because it was a energetically it was a very strong time on so many levels. Um, I personally did not have the energy to go out and campaign because it happened at the same time that my family had excommunicated
Mm.
me for my sexuality, but I had felt the rage that had erupted. And I also felt like that rage had given me even more power within my own personal issues that I was having with my family. And I actually do track homophobia to colonialism,
Yes.
to slavery
Yes.
as well, right? So it's in my experience, it's all very much connected. Um, but what had some that George Floyd thing also changed something in me because in Jamaica, we have a great awareness of America, but through American media. And so through American media, I was programmed to think of Black Americans as lazy, as ghetto, as, crying over nothing, as aggressive. That was the image I had of them. And I feel ashamed to say it now, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I would even think, if I go to the US, I don't want to go to a Black school because those Black Americans, like, who knows what they'll do or whatever it is. And this is coming from my little uptown Jamaican self being programmed by whatever American media came to me in the
Mm-hmm.
90s. When I moved to Chicago, I also dated a Black woman who would talk to me about this thing called microaggressions. And I'm like, I don't know what this lady is talking about. She's just being dramatic, like, so extra. What's going on? And it wasn't until one, George Floyd, two, I had a friend who I'd made who was my neighbor, beautiful Black fairy. She calls herself a Black fairy. She's a fairy. Um, and I and we actually, this is gonna get a little woo woo for some people, but I'm gonna go there because this is my experience. We went to the forest and did some mushrooms, and when we did the mushrooms, I saw her pain. Like, I don't even know how to explain it. I felt like a channel was open, and I saw her, and I really saw the pain of being a Black person in the US.
Hmm.
Like, it hit me. I felt it. And I also felt the ways that we've been separated against each other. Because here's the thing, Shadia, your your heritage from enslaved people, her heritage as this Black American, my heritage as a Jamaican, we are all descendants of the same group of people who were
Enslaved.
who crimes were committed
Yes.
against, right? So in a sense, if you take out some of the generations, it's almost like we're a group of cousins who got kidnapped and just scattered all over.
Yes.
And that's what I saw. And I saw her as my family. I saw her as my kin for the first time. And I saw also how the storyline of Black Americans this, Black American that, kept me separate from loving my people, my own
Mm.
people, my own people.
Yeah.
And it made me reflect on certain situations that happened in Chicago. And I was like, oh, I think these are the microaggressions that this girl I was dating was telling me about.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll tell you one, this is the story I'm coming to know. It comes from when you talk about being seen. I lived in the south side of Chicago, which happens to be mostly Black people, and I went to school in in the downtown area, which is a mix of people, businesses, and living. It's more of a mix of people, but majority lighter skinned, right? So Chicago, you go more north, lighter skin, you go more south, so darker skin. And actually would look at it when I was traveling on the bus. I'm leaving from Wabash, I'm going down Wabash, and at a certain point, at 30th Street, all of the white people get off. Then by 40th, all of the kind of Asian looking people get off. Then below 50th, it's just Black people left on the bus. Like, you could just see the gradient of
Yeah.
people left on the bus depending on how far you went down. So it is segregated in that way. But because I was at school on the northern side, I went to a gym on the northern side because I spent most of my time at school. And so I'd go to this gym and I'm in the locker room. And I mean, I'm a generally friendly person, so I'm not saying we have to have a big conversation in the locker room, but if I am in my locker and you are coming up right beside me or even above me to open your locker, I would expect a excuse me or a hey or a hi or just a acknowledgement that there's a human there. Like, this is just what I would expect.
Mm-hmm.
This is not what happened. People would come in and they would come to the locker right beside me or the locker above me or below me, and there's no talk, no look, like no acknowledgement that someone is there, Shadia.
Mm-hmm.
Just zero acknowledgement, which I just found weird. I just found it weird, especially as a Caribbean person. But I just assumed, okay, Americans are just not friendly. But then there was one specific day where I was at the gym, and this gym had a sauna and jacuzzi. And so I was in my swimsuit, and two people spoke to me that day. And I was very surprised in the locker room. One person came to me and was like, "Oh my gosh, I love your swimsuit." And I was shocked that anybody had spoken to me in this locker room because up until then, nobody had.
Uh-huh.
And then another person was getting into their locker, very not even so close to mine, and they're just like, "Oh, hi, excuse me, I'm just gonna pass right here," right? And went to their locker. And so I was leaving, and I thought, "Oh, you see, Sharice, Americans aren't so bad after all." But no, that I thought on the situation later on. Do you know that those two people who happened to talk to me were non-white? One was Asian, and one was, I would assume, Mexican.
Yeah.
That was when I started to understand what they call this microaggression thing.
Yeah.
Because no white person saw me. Like, I just did not exist. I just didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made me so much more aware of, and I mean, it's happened on the subway too. People have just bumped into me on the sidewalk. White people have just bumped into me walking past me. I've been in meetings with fellow entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur, and I will be talking with a group of white men, and they'll just be looking at me like they don't understand anything I'm saying. And then someone else will just say something else, and they all understand what that person is
Mm-hmm.
saying. And I know what I'm saying is making sense because I'm a very well educated woman. And I also speak powerfully because I'm used to doing that in Jamaica. Jamaica has made me a well educated, well spoken woman who knows what she's talking about. But it was just the way that in these meetings I realized there was no even resonance. Like, they couldn't see me. They just saw whatever they saw as a black woman. And I mean, that was the first time in my life I felt like a black woman as something lesser than. In Jamaica, I've always felt like a black woman, but it's always been like, I'm a black woman and I'm beautiful. Great. Yay. But in the States, I definitely, and it was just 2 years I lived in Chicago, I definitely felt, oh, I'm a black woman. And that means to some people something weird. You
Yeah.
know?
It means you're lesser than or whatnot. I want to bring this conversation up of caste because it's something that I'm now learning more of. I watched the movie Origin. Um, it's a really, really good movie made by Ava DuVernay. I love the things that she makes. Um, but the story is based on a book called Caste, written by Isabel Wilkerson. And she went on a journey of exploring the racial dynamics in America, the caste system in India, and the Holocaust that happened in Germany/Europe. And people were like, there's nothing in common. Like, the one was with Africans that were trafficked, the one is against Jewish people, and the other one is like India with their own thing that they created. But at the end of the day, it's all about hierarchy. It's all about there is a dominating caste and there is a lower caste, the bottom of the bottom, which in India were called untouchables. I believe they changed that to Dalits now, but untouchables. And I think that is a term that explains the situation really well. In fact, when Martin Luther King Jr. went to India, they called him a fellow untouchable. Because when you talk about, the how on the bus you would see, the racial hierarchy literally reflected, right? It's such
Mm-hmm.
a perfect scenario, but also how you were an untouchable in that locker room.
Mm-hmm.
And it explains so much because that's also what the Jews were. And it's all based on bullshit stories that people create in order to have a dominating caste, a dominating class. And I've
Yeah.
and that made me reflect so much on the issues in Curacao, because Curacao is, depending on who you ask, they'll say Curacao is pretty mixed. You do not get a lot of very unmixed people that are, excuse me, really, really dark skin here in Curacao that much. Like, when you see them, they stand out. And they're usually immigrants and not originally from Curacao. Um, so I realized that when I talk about racial awareness, a lot of people are like, that's not an issue here. We all live together in harmony. We all we love all cultures, we enjoy our languages, we all live together in harmony. And that is both a beautiful thing, and it's also the mask to what's happening beneath the surface. Because if I say, oh, look, you have different people from different races partying together, based on the caste system, like in America or in Europe, where it's very much black and white, then you could say, oh no, racism or colorism doesn't exist in Curacao. But that's not the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so this reflection, it actually came this morning. I didn't know we were going to talk about this today. But I realized that I think I need to change my approach in some of the things that I say and do, to say, to talk more from a caste system idea, because literally, based on how light your skin is, you are in a better position. And I don't think the discrimination is as heavy as it used to be in the past. But generationally, if you are always in the higher class, chances are really, really high you're still in the higher class. And if you,
Mm-hmm.
because you're in the higher class, you didn't have to deal with anything or let go of any of the racial things you inherited being from slavery and enslaving people, or whatever your background is, then you don't have to deal with them. And then whenever somebody brings it up, you say, oh, but I deal with everybody. I talk to my gardener and I talk to everybody, and I don't discriminate. But as my friend always says, you can't fuck your way out of racism. You can't, just
Mm-hmm.
because you're in a relationship with somebody or you treat them a certain way, doesn't mean that there are dynamics and little things that are at play. And those little things, they might seem very little. They might seem like a little energy or a little shift. And some people might think of it as nothing, but at the end of the day, that might be the reason why somebody stays stuck or they progress
Yeah.
in their life. And so, yes, it is a problem.
I love how you say you can't fuck your way out of
Yes.
racism. And it makes me think of a relationship I had with an older white man. That was an adventure. Uh,
This is the end of part one of this conversation. If you want to hear the rest of it, including Sharice's experience with this older white man, check back next week for the rest of the conversation. See you then.